The gentleman
yields for questions. Yes,
yields
sir.
for questions.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking you for meeting with me. I think we met in my office about a couple of hours almost to talk about Senate Bill 1. Let me ask you, when you laid out the bill, one of the purposes that was not in the bill was about increasing access to voting. And the purpose, one of the purposes ought to be to increase voter turnout in Texas. Are you aware of where Texas ranked in all 50 states in terms of voter turnout?
No, sir, Chairman Dutton, I am not.
Well, I've heard that we were 45th out of 50 states in terms of voter turnout during the last election. And it seems to me one of the purposes ought to be in the bill ought to be to increase voter turnout. Would you agree with me?
I would say inherently in a democracy such as ours, we yearn to have every person that has a constitutional right to vote to exercise that right. Yes.
That's right. And so you wouldn't mind if we amended so that the purpose actually would envelop that.
I can find numerous instances contained in the provisions of SB 1 before you today that I believe improves voter access. And I'm sorry, just let me finish my one statement. And in the legislative intent that we talk about, we actually talk about promoting voter access.
Yes, but what I'm getting at is the purpose of the bill. When you laid it out and you talked about the individual things that involve the purpose, that's one of the things that's excluded. It's not included in the bill such that, as you said, in a democracy, we ought to have everybody voting. And certainly if Texas is 45th in voter turnout, we ought to be thinking about that in terms of trying to improve that. I mean, wouldn't you agree with me that that's one of the purposes ought to be to increase voter turnout in Texas such that we get people where you have created in the bill, you say access to voting, more access. We ought to make sure that the purpose at least follows that.
And I think I understand where you're going with it, but I go back to our legislative intent of promoting voter access, and I believe multiple provisions here do that. And just because folks have rights, we don't always see them choose to exercise their rights, and I understand that as well. And that can be frustrating for our friends and neighbors because they decline to participate in the process.
Right, but we ought to be encouraging not only the way we could increase the number of hours without creating an increase in voter turnout. And what I'm getting at is while we increase the access, or while we do something about that in the bill, what we don't do is in terms of the purpose of increasing the voter turnout in Texas.
You know, Chairman Dutton, that makes me think of a phrase that my grandmother used to tell me, and it's common to all of us, is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But the concept is the same. Just because folks have the right to vote doesn't mean that we can force them to vote.
But you can encourage them to drink. I mean, you could give them salt or something, and they'll go drink. Is the point that my grandfather used to say too. And I heard that. But I just wondered if if democracy revolves around all of us participating, we should be involved in trying to make sure and ensure that people actually participate in the democracy by increasing the voter turnout. And that's all I'm suggesting.
And I hear you, and I think that is something that individually you and I take on that task to encourage our fellow neighbors and friends and family members to participate, but I don't necessarily believe that is the state's responsibility to actively force everyone to go vote.
No, I don't mean force. I mean just do something that's creative that helps people access their right to vote. And while you increase the access, as you said, what we don't do, on the other hand, is, at least in the purpose of the bill, suggest or encourage people to go out to vote.
And there's a fine line there between the state suggesting, encouraging, or forcing folks to exercise their right to vote and folks individually choosing to do so. And I
Absolutely.
think that's a choice issue that we have, and I understand that.
Right.
I guess where you're going with it is perhaps the state becoming some active player in requiring or forcing or encouraging folks to go vote versus us having a system in place and folks choosing to participate in that election system.
Right. Well, actually, what I'm talking about is just in the purpose itself, as you laid out, that's in the bill. If we could put in there trying to increase the voter turnout, I think is what I'm getting at.
I understand, and I'm happy to have dialogue with you on that, although
Okay.
I'm not necessarily in agreement right at this moment.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Wait, don't do that, Mr. Speaker. Don't hold it up right there. Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Ms. Davis, for 1 second. Gentleman's time's expired. Is objection to extension of the time? There is not an objection. Ms. Davis, for what purpose?
Thank you. Will the gentleman yield for a couple of questions just as a follow-up and for legislative intent?